What's up, everybody? Welcome back to yet another episode of Go Talk with Marcus, powered by Podex, fueled by GoFuel, and presented by the Give Us a Shot Network. Today, Jalon Dixon and TV on Basketball, hosts of the Hit Your Free Throws podcast, are joining the show today as we talk all things NBA basketball. The San Antonio Spurs are clearly the luckiest team in the history of basketball, having secured more than likely yet another generational talent at the big man position. The Denver Nuggets and the Miami Heat have punched their tickets into Thursday's NBA Finals. We're going to talk about all that and so much more, including whether or not Damian Lillard is on the move from Portland. Stay tuned next.
Give them a shot to do what?
Fellas, how we doing tonight?
Chilling, bro. But yourself?
Doing good.
Feeling good. The last time we were here, we were talking about Jokic, and it got all.
TV beat us to it. TV beat us to it. Oh, okay. Now I know this pod. Now I know this pod about to go up. Let's go in. Now I'm ready. Now if I wasn't ready before, I'm ready now.
I was gonna bring this up a bit later, but this guy went off rip.
Oh, let's get it. Let's get it.
You guys were here. We talked about Jokic, and they got a little spicy. So, let's see exactly how spicy it gets today. I'm anticipating it to get real spicy, but we'll see. Before we jump into Jokic and all that, we have to start off with Victor Wembanyama, or as I like to call him, Victor Spank Your Mama, who is no doubtly going to be the #1 overall pick in this year's NBA draft, is headed to the Spurs, most likely, unless the Spurs pull off the shock of the century and not draft Victor or trade the first overall pick. Jalon, we'll start with you. What does Victor Wembanyama going to the Spurs mean for San Antonio moving forward?
I think this is huge for their overall organization in terms of moving forward because it gives them a direction now. I feel like the funniest part about it is everybody talks about like the Spurs being so bad for the better part of the last 2 to 3 seasons, but they've really this is the first time they really committed to the tank. That's the funniest part about calling them the luckiest team in NBA history is because the first time in a couple of seasons that they decide to go back into the tankathon streets, they get yet again, like you mentioned before, one of the greatest generational talents we might see walk through the NBA. It also puts them in a good position developmental wise to be the next it team in the NBA. They're going to have a lot of eyes on them. It's funny because the Spurs are the broccoli team, right? They're the bland team that even now, post Manu Ginobili, Tim Duncan, and Tony Parker, they're still the team that everybody kind of associates with blah basketball. But now everybody is going to be tuning in, into, San Antonio Spurs basketball. And it makes them interesting again. I don't know if they're, obviously playoffs and things like that. Those are circumstances we'll have to look at down the line. That'll be determined more by just how good Victor is in year one. But this gives them a foundational piece. They never really had like a it guy. They never had that guy that you want to build around. I like Keldon Johnson. I like Jeremy. So I like what they bring to the table. Devin Wells. But Vic is the guy now. Like he steps in and he's like, okay, we have the foundational piece. We've got a handful of guys around him that fit in a very solid skill set around what he does well. Now we can actually start building in a real direction as opposed to still trying to, pick at interesting skill sets and just see what fits under Pop.
TV, do you agree?
I do agree. I mean, let's see. I mean, the last 2 times they officially went to the tank, when they went to get Tim Duncan, it was because David Robinson got injured. Fully commit to the tank, get Tim Duncan. Now they traded away DeJounte Murray, can fully commit to the tank, get Victor Wembanyama. It's just written in the stars. It feels like it's the script writers, as we like to say on our show a lot, really mapped this out for us. I mean, Victor Wembanyama, as people have been saying for the longest time now, one of the best prospects the NBA has ever seen. A 7'4", 7'5", 7'6". I swear his height is changing every day. He has the skill set that we've not seen before. People have been called unicorns. People have been called demigods, but this guy's been called a freaking alien at this point. So, like, he's the type of player who by himself is going to get you 10 to 15 games on national television, and that's what the Spurs are going to get this year. And I think it's just really good in a good direction, like Jay mentioned, for the Spurs to go to, because they had a roster full of guys who could be part of their future or could be pieces that can be traded towards that future or to help accelerate the rebuild. Now you have the guys to build around. You have you have your draft picks still. You got a bunch of young players that could be useful assets for other teams. It's the Spurs are in a good spot right now when it comes to being able to compete in a few years down the line. And if they really want to accelerate this rebuild, they got some pieces that they could trade going forward.
My one concern with Wembanyama going to the Spurs, and I agree with everything that both of you guys said. I mean, this is amazing for the Spurs, obviously not just the fan base, but obviously the team as a trajectory moving forward. My one concern with the Spurs is how much longer is Greg Popovich going to be playing or going to be coaching on the sidelines, right? That's my one concern. When you look at, what they did with David Robinson, Pop was very heavily involved, obviously, in the development of David Robinson into a Hall of Fame center. Same thing for Tim Duncan at the power forward / center position. Victor's not going to have that for much longer, right? He has that for, I would say, maybe 3 years tops. What do the Spurs look like? What does Victor Wembanyama look like post Popovich is what I'm really, really concerned about. Because when you look at the Popovich coaching tree, all of them are elsewhere and they're firmly rooted, right? Like Ime Udoka just got hired by the Rockets. Becky Hammond is obviously the coach in Las Vegas for the Aces of the WNBA with the potential to maybe explore options in the NBA, but the Spurs haven't seemed to have any interest in bringing her back into the fold, back into the coaching staff. We know that Tim Duncan had a stint as part of the coaching staff, but he's not going to be the guy to do it. That's really my question is, what will the Spurs look like? What will Victor Wembanyama look like once Popovich retires? But like TV, like you said, man, I mean, Victor Wembanyama is a one-of-a-kind basketball player. He's a one-of-a-kind human being, right? Like the length he has, the ability he has, not just as a defender, but as an offensively to be able to be a threat on all three levels, to be like that alien of sorts, like you mentioned, like that is something that I think will bring a lot of life into the Spurs. And this is not a Spurs team that is bereft of talent, right? There is talent on this roster. Is it playoff caliber talent? No, but it's talent. Talent that as they continue to grow, as they continue to develop, can turn into playoff caliber talent. I think that Victor going to the Spurs is the first step on the Oklahoma City Thunder trajectory for San Antonio, right? You look at what San Antonio did. They traded away some star caliber players. They got a young guy back to build around. That young guy was Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They used all those draft picks they had to continue to build around SGA, and look at where they are now. Like, they're going to be a playoff team next year, more than likely. I think Victor going to the Spurs is the first step in that for them. The difference is they traded away DeJounte. They didn't really get a guy back directly from that trade to build around, but they have Victor Wembanyama now that they can build around, which proves that committing to the tank can prove to be quite successful.
Don't talk to the Pistons. Don't talk to the Pistons.
That's true. Unless you're the Detroit Pistons, who won 17 games just for the 5th pick, which is heartbreaking. The San Antonio Spurs, I think they're going to be in the thick of things. They're going to be right back in the thick of things within the next 2 to 3 years for sure, as Victor continues to get better. And the one thing I'm excited for is Victor versus Chet 3 or 4 times a year. I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, yeah.
That's going to be amazing. The battle of 2 skinny people. It's always fun when giraffes fight. So let's stick with the lottery for a second, because there's been reports and speculation, at least for the past couple of seasons, really, about what the future holds for Damian Lillard, right? There are, at least within the organization, it seems like they're going to try to trade that 3rd pick to bring someone in to help kind of build around Dame. There's fans, either of the team or just NBA fans that are fans of Dame, that want Portland to move on from Dame so that Dame can go and succeed potentially and prosper elsewhere. TV, what do you think is the best thing for the Blazers? Should they trade that 3rd pick to kind of build around Dame, or should they cut Dame loose and try to just start from scratch?
I've given up on the idea that Dame's going to get traded. He's a Portland lifer, man. They've had chances time and time again to trade Damian Lillard, and from all accounts, it feels like he is committed to the Portland Trail Blazers, and he'll stay there for as long as they'll have him. I think if they do trade him at this point, with the amount of loyalty he's shown, for the amount of love that he has shown Portland, and the way that he's like repping them this entire career, cutting him loose would just do bad for the organization in the sense of image and how they're going to be able to attract people down the line. Because you had a top 3, top 4 point guard of the last 5 to 10 years be with the organization, want to build want to grow with you, wants to be with you for life, and you're cutting him off just for, even though like you've had the opportunity to keep him, it's not the right move. But with the 3rd overall pick, I do think because they commit to Damian Lillard, I don't see a reason why they shouldn't trade this pick. You're not getting Wembanyama. Scoot Henderson and Brandon Miller could be good consolation prizes, but at the end of the day, they do not fit Damian Lillard's timeline. The options out there are kind of iffy. I mean, Jaylen Brown has been tossed out there now after the Celtics loss. Siakam, OG from my Toronto Raptors as well. There's some guys there that could maybe elevate them back to like the 7th, 8th seed, but I don't see really anyone really like elevating this team to contender status. But they have Damian Lillard there. Whether you like it or not, they're going to be committing to trying to compete now. So having the 3rd overall pick and drafting someone is just not going to really do you any good.
Jalon, what do you think, man?
I mean, I think they should explore it, but I think the funny part about it is no matter what you want or even what Dame wants, the biggest factor is that boy is expensive now. that boy is very expensive. That secondary extension that kicks in towards the 25-26 season that he signed more recently makes him even more expensive than what he's already sitting on in terms of his hefty contract. He's a guy that obviously is already in his 30s, so there's a certain limitation there. Obviously, being one of the greater shooters that we've seen in NBA history, that does translate well in terms of having him being able to age gracefully throughout those years. But it is something that does also put limitations on him in terms of what his upside is for any championship caliber team. If Dame were to want to be traded, this actually would be like the ideal season for a reset, not only for him in terms of moving on into next season, but also for the Portland Trail Blazers. This is a big time draft. This is a big time landing spot, landing at 3. They can either do something huge by either being able to acquire a guy like Scoot Henderson or Brandon Miller to be able to put next to Shaedon Sharpe and Anthony Simons and build that way as a team that likes to draft relatively young and likes to draft in a very like unique kind of way in terms of the type of tools they like from guys, or there's the complete opposite route if they choose not to. And this is what TV was mentioning earlier, the more inevitable route being them trading the 3rd overall pick to be able to acquire a star. The biggest thing is though, they're going to have to hit on whoever that is. Like that's one of those things where you don't get many opportunities to land this high, have a guy like Damian Lillard on your roster, look to try to go head hunting for superstars, and there's many guys that are available. Like right now, there's a handful of guys that may not be disgruntled, but are in circumstances where them being thrown out in trade talks doesn't feel as crazy as maybe in other years. So Portland's in a tough position. If I'm Portland, I think you got to try your best to see if you can move off of Dame, especially with how expensive his contract is. But I think the more realistic route is that they're probably going to end up trading that 3rd. They can't use this pick. If they plan on keeping Damian Lillard, they can't use this 3rd overall pick. There's no offense to whoever's supposed to go 3rd, but if the idea is to build a championship contending roster, or at least at this point, a Western Conference final caliber team for this roster, they cannot use this pick. I apologize to anybody that probably fits the mold of being taken around this area, but they're not going to be able to contribute day one in a way that elevates this team the way a Damian Lillard team needs to be.
The 3rd overall pick, I think, who has the 2nd pick?
Charlotte.
The Charlotte. So like the 3rd overall pick, I think, is more than likely going to be Scoot. And Scoot's the 2nd best player in the draft. But I can't foresee a scenario where the Hornets draft Scoot because number 1, they're extremely point guard heavy. But number 2, they already have their point guard in LaMelo. And I don't know if that dynamic of a Scoot Henderson LaMelo ball like backcourt would work if LaMelo's not on ball because that's when he plays best. Scoot going to the Blazers wouldn't be a good fit for Scoot if we're being honest. Like they've already got Dame, they already have Anthony Simons. That's just not That's not a good fit. So it would more. I agree with you, right? Like whether it's Scoot or maybe the Hornets shock us and it ends up being Brandon Miller. Like neither of those guys, even if it was Victor and he wouldn't fall to 3, but even if it was Victor, like Victor Wembanyama isn't as talented as he is. He still isn't going to be. He doesn't have that ability to just come into this team and just turn them into, like you said, Jalon, at the very least, a Western Conference Finals contender. The Blazers have to move on from Damian Lillard. And the reason why the Blazers have to move on from Damian Lillard is, let's say the Blazers trade the 3rd pick. And let's say they trade it to Boston, for example, and they get a Jaylen Brown, who's kind of been the guy that everyone's been talking about. Is a Damian Lillard, Jaylen Brown tandem in Portland better than Denver? No. Is it better than Phoenix? I don't think so. Is it better than a healthy Golden State Warriors team that can win games on the road? No. I don't think it's better than the Clippers if everyone's healthy in LA. I don't think it's better than a Lakers team that is completely healthy with AD playing top-tier basketball. I don't think it's better than the Kings team that we saw this season that's going to get 1 year better. The Kings were not a flash in the pan this year. They might be on that same level, but it's not going to be like they're head and shoulders above the Kings. Could they be better than the Grizzlies? Maybe, but like the Grizzlies' outlook next season is going to be heavily dependent on what the league decides to do with Ja Morant. And would they be better than a Grizzlies without the Ja Morant? Absolutely, I think so. Would they be better than the Grizzlies with Ja Morant? Absolutely not. I don't think so. I don't think that's what we're looking at. That's already 7 teams right there that made the playoffs. I think they could be better than the Timberwolves. I don't know if they're better than the Pelicans with a healthy Zion, and I don't know if they're better than the Thunder with a SGA another year in the system with a Josh Giddey and with an OKC that will have Chet Holmgren back next season. And I don't know if they'll be better than the Mavericks, but they'll be on that same tier. Like the Blazers were 13th this season in the Western Conference, a Western Conference that also has the Utah Jazz, who while they started off the season very hot and fell off, like the Jazz, I think, are going to be in the running for one of those play-in spots next season because Larry Markkinen's going to get better. Walker Kessler had a really solid rookie season. I don't think it was talked about a lot. Like, how much of a needle mover really then is Jaylen Brown? And it's not that Jaylen Brown's a bad ball player, because he's not. But how much of a needle mover would Jaylen Brown be on this roster to elevate them from the 13th seed? At most, they're a play-in team. And I know we'll talk about the Heat in a bit, who were obviously a play-in team. That's a well-coached play-in team, though, with dogs up and down the roster. And a play-in team that got to where they are now without their second-best scorer in Tyler Hero. So if we're being completely honest, I don't think the Heat struggle as much as they do if they have Tyler Hero throughout the course of the playoffs. But like I said, we'll talk about them later. I love Dame, and I think I'm one of very few people on the face of the planet that appreciates the loyalty that he expresses to Portland, because it's not something that we see very often in today's NBA, right? When a superstar gets disgruntled, they want to get out of there. They want to get out of there as soon as possible on the first thing out of the city, right? And even to a lesser degree, the same thing with Bradley Beal. The difference, though, is that Damian Lillard is still an impact player, and Damian Lillard is still a top 15, top 10 player in basketball. Bradley Beal is not. So when I'm looking at this from Portland's standpoint, what I'm looking at pretty much what the Spurs did to DeJounte Murray. We love you, bro. There's no hard feelings. We want to see you do well. Unfortunately, though, this is not the place for you to succeed. And rather than continue to keep you here in hopes of trying to succeed around you and we're not doing a good job of it, we're going to let you go. We're going to send you somewhere that maybe you want to go, but for sure it's going to give us the best deal back for whatever you're worth. And we're going to build from there on our own. I think that's Portland's best bet. They can't.
Would they have done this years ago? They should have done this years ago then.
Well, I don't know. I'll be honest. I don't know. I think a lot of the NBA fandom has blown out of proportion exactly the trajectory of Damian Lillard's career since he's been there. Like, the Portland Trailblazers are one of the better teams, not just in the Western Conference, but in basketball at one point when they had that tandem of Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. That was one of the best backcourts in basketball. They obviously made it to the Western Conference Finals. And for what it was worth, I know they got swept, but they were really just if you guys remember, heading into the fourth quarters of each and every one of those games, they were winning. Like, it's not, and that was a basketball team that I know KD wasn't there, I think, for a bit of it, but Klay Thompson was still there in that series, and they were up in the fourth quarter of all those games. They played good basketball for 75% of the game. They just couldn't close it out. Like, this is a basketball team that had Damian Lillard at the helm and was a series away from making it to the NBA Finals, and that means a lot. They obviously moved on from CJ McCollum, and they clearly didn't have a plan afterwards. I think that's what we keep focusing on is the move. They moved on from CJ McCollum with no real plan for what to do after CJ had left. I think that's what's been the undoing of the Portland Trailblazers because Damian Lillard's still box office and he's still a superstar when he's healthy, when he's on the court. He dropped 71 this season. And I know everyone would say, well, he had to drop 71 because the team is bad. I don't care why I don't care how he got to it or what the circumstances were. He dropped 71 points. He dropped 71 points in the NBA, which there's only a handful of guys that can say that they've dropped at least 70, and now he's on that list. He is still a guy that maybe he's not at a point in his career where he can be the number one option. Maybe he was never the guy that could backpack a basketball team the way we've seen players do that over the course of the NBA history. But he's still a guy that can be a 1B or a very solid second option, depending on where he goes, whether that's to Milwaukee, whether he ends up in Boston. Wherever he ends up, he can still contribute and potentially win himself a championship somewhere else. Portland's not the place to do it. And I just really think that because of the human being that Damian Lillard is, I would be shocked if Damian Lillard says, I want out. I feel like the only way that Dame is out of Portland is if Portland recognizes within themselves, bro, we got to let you go. It's that if you love something, you let it go kind of thing. I think that's where we're at. I don't know if Portland will do that because I think that they do recognize that Damian Lillard isn't just their best chance of winning a championship, even though they're not close to it. Damian Lillard puts butts in seats. Damian Lillard sells tickets. Damian Lillard is the reason why Portland Trailblazers fans watch those market games that aren't on national TV. It's because of Damian Lillard. And all those things go away if number 0 isn't stepping onto the floor with you, unless it's the game he comes back to play against you on the road with wherever he's at. I think it's time for Portland to let him go. But if they don't let him go, I cannot foresee a scenario where Dame says, I want out. That's just not the kind of guy he is.
I think that's the mixed message of it all, though, right? Because at the end of the day, if you look at all of the moves that Portland has made over the last 2 years in particular, they've just gotten younger. I mean, even with some of the prospects that they've reached out to, obviously Shaedon Sharpe was one of the youngest, if not the youngest prospect in his draft class. Mm-hmm. Given the extension to Anthony Simons only doubled down, I think it goes to the point of what you just said about them not having a plan post CJ McCollum trade. You trade CJ McCollum, then you give a big time extension to another small guard in the backcourt next to Damian Lillard. So basically all you did was create the same backcourt over again in terms of the limitations specifically defensively that this backcourt has. And the only thing that changes is, he has athletic upside and he's younger than CJ. But otherwise, the circumstances of what this team looks like backcourt wise is basically the same. And then when you look at what they did outside of that, right, moving off from Josh Hart, who granted wasn't shooting the 3 ball very well during that portion of the season for them, decided to start smacking that joint for the Knicks after, but hey, that's neither here nor there. But they do that. You look at some of even if you look at their roster currently, if you keep Jeremy Grant, who of course is a guy that is up for consideration as well in terms of what they're going to do with him in this offseason, of course they're probably going to pay him, but when you look at their roster, I think they only have 4 guys above the age of 26 or 27. This is a young team, and they've designed it that way. Yet Damian Lillard's whole MO has been speaking on the idea of wanting Portland to build a contender around him. So the mixed message is your superstar wants one thing, but your front office is operating in a different direction. At some point, you have to be bold enough, Marcus, as you mentioned beforehand, to let something that you love go on your own. It has to be one of those things where they've been trying to play it as we want to do something and we are going to operate as such and hope that you make the decision for us to do so, right? It's the idea of, when a business cuts a person who they don't want, they cut their hours back, not because they don't want to fire them because then they can file for unemployment. So what do? You drop their hours down and you make them want to quit themselves. That way you don't got to deal with the paperwork. It's the same thing in this situation. They want the easy way out. They want the route of starting the rebuild with Damian Lillard still on the roster in hopes that Dame will be the one that comes to the realization, comes to the conclusion that the only way that he's going to have a chance to win at a high level is going somewhere else. And until Damian Lillard makes that decision for them, they're always going to be cap strapped like this. So it's going to be up to them to make this decision. And I think we all agree on this based on all of our takes so far. sitting here in the position they are with the pick that they have, with guys like Anthony Simons, Nasir Little, Shaden Sharp, guys like that on the roster already to build with, having the 3rd overall pick is very valuable. And if there was any time to pull the trigger, it would be now. So they are in a tough spot. But what they decide to do with that 3rd overall pick will basically define what the timeline is. And that, I think that's the most notable part about Portland's offseason is the 3rd overall pick either helps solidify that they're jump starting whatever next iteration past Dame is coming, or if they choose to trade it in hopes of getting a superstar, that is their way of saying we don't stop this push for the championship train until Damian Lillard pretty much gives it up. I mean, the 3rd overall pick now is determining everything.
Yeah.
When you look at some of the stars who have been the faces of their franchise and arguably the best players to ever wear the colors for the team that have been traded over the past couple of seasons, like, there's nothing wrong with it. Like, we've seen it happen. Whether it be because the player wanted it to, or whether it be because the team wanted to just make this happen. Like, we have gotten to the point with Damian Lillard where Damian Lillard, because of the state of the NBA and sports really in general, of like, now we are in this, as people say all the time, this player empowerment thing. Like, people are starting to not respect Damian Lillard because of his undying loyalty. And in Damian Lillard's defense, when you look at the guys that Damian Lillard grew up watching, that was the thing back in the day. I ain't going nowhere. Like, come hell or high water, bro. Like, I'm here and I'm here to stay. I'm 10 toes down and we're rocking it out no matter what, rebuild or not. Like, we're here. That is not the era that we're in anymore. And so for me, like I said earlier, I don't have an issue with a guy like a Damian Lillard or a guy like a Bradley Beal to a lesser degree who are just wanting to stay with the team that drafted them and want to try to win a ring. Here's the thing, though, right? We talk about this with athletes all the time. Sometimes you have to put an athlete out of their own misery. Like, sometimes you got to old yeller it and take them to the back of the shed and just put them down. And I think, again, that's what the Blazers have to do. The Blazers have to pull Damian Lillard. They have to swallow their pride, pull Damian Lillard into the office and make a business decision. Bro, we love you. Like, whether you're a Blazer for life or not, the jersey's going up in the rafters. You've scored more points in the Blazers jersey than anybody. Right? There's only one guy that's ever won a championship for the Blazers. That was Bill Walton back in '77, right? And despite that, you've got a strong case, if not an open shut case, to be the best player to ever step foot on the floor for our franchise. Like, that is who you are as a basketball player, and we appreciate you for that. And we appreciate all of the moments that you've given us in the playoffs, as far as the buzzer beaters, as far as the clutch performances, as far as all of that stuff. But unfortunately, this ship has sailed. Like, this train has reached its final destination. This is no longer something that works for you. And unfortunately, it's something that we can't do anymore. And we need to look to the future of our franchise. It's beyond just what Dame wants. It's beyond just what the fans want. It's about what you said, Jay. Like, they're cap strapped. As long as Damian Lillard continues to play basketball, he's still an all-NBA talent when he's healthy, when he plays as many games he's supposed to, right? He's still one of the best players in basketball. He's going to keep getting these all-NBA nods. He's going to keep getting these all-star selections. And when you get a certain number of those things, and when you hit certain calibers, you're eligible for money that you wouldn't be eligible for otherwise. And Damian Lillard's going to continue to accept that money. Why wouldn't he? He has a family. He's got kids to take care of. This is the argument I have with about Bradley Beal. That man has multiple children to take care of. He's a basketball player, but that don't mean nothing. They still get down with the get down when it's time for them to get down with the get down, and they're producing. Like, they have families to raise. They have mouths to feed. They're not going to turn down millions of dollars just for a chance to take a pay cut and maybe win a championship, right? We see every single season a championship isn't guaranteed. Look no further than the Milwaukee Bucks. Look no further than the Boston Celtics. Look at the defending champion Warriors. Look even at a Lakers team, right? Like, championships aren't guaranteed. And the Portland Trailblazers have to swallow their pride, get out of their own way, and come to the goose. Look, bro, we love you, and we are very appreciative for all that you've done for us in this organization in the, 10, 12, however many years it is that he's been there. But we got to let you go. And we're going to let you be firmly in the mix of all of these trade packages, and you're going to have a say in it. We're going to send you that wherever gives us the best offer, but we're also going to listen to where you want to go. Do you want to go to Boston? We'll give more weight to that Boston trade package. Do you want to go to Milwaukee with Giannis? We'll give more weight to a potential Milwaukee trade package. Like whatever you want, we'll listen to it, but do know that we're going to do what's best for us in the future of our franchise. That third pick is crucial. It's not going to get used by Portland, and it's either – I don't think there's any way it gets used by Portland. I don't know if even if Dame gets moved, I could still see the Trailblazers moving off of 3. Because like you said, Jalen, I don't know if it's that valuable. It's no shot at Scoot. It's no shot at Brandon Miller. I just don't know if that's a guy that you want to build your team around. I think they move on from it and maybe try again in 2024. Without Damian Lillard, they'll be in prime position to pick first overall. They were prime position to pick first overall this year with Dame. Like, I don't know what it looks like, but they need to take the OKC approach and stack up on picks and figure it out and find their guy. But Dame's not the guy anymore. And it's not because he can't do it. It's just because it's time. Like, it's time to end the marriage. Like, get the divorce and make it happen.
I think my only pushback about the pick thing is that 2024 ain't the move. I mean, if every indication from what I've seen is that 2024 is dicey. Like, it's one of those that I don't know if you necessarily want to trade into. Something that's interesting, though, is to take phone calls about potentially getting multiple picks in this draft. One of the more notable teams, there's a handful of teams that have multiple draft picks in the earlier portions of the first round. Orlando is one of those teams. Same thing with the Utah Jazz. Those are two teams that have multiple picks within the early portions of the first round that if they want to package things to be able to move up, if we're talking about the third overall pick being traded for the sake of being able to acquire more young talent, I think that would be an interesting play for them in terms of trying to build this thing out. Because if Damian, the way I view it is, if there's two ways that the third overall pick gets utilized if Damian Lillard is legitimately on the trade block. The first one is you get the best player available at the moment, and you build within that with guys that you already have, because they have a handful of decent young players as it is that I think are intriguing with where they're already building towards. Or again, the opposite option is to look at some of these teams that are towards the middle portion of the lottery, or that might have multiple bites at the apple in the lottery. Again, the Orlando Magic are a perfect one because, of course, they robbed the Bulls of the only pick I was looking forward to this year because, of course, we landed just outside the top 10, whatever. But that's one of those teams. Or again, the Utah Jazz, where if they like a guy towards the top 3 and they want to move up for him, those are two teams that could be interesting in terms of packaging up 2 of these picks in the early round to be able to do that. And I think that's where Portland can maybe exercise a little bit of leverage with the third overall pick. My thing is, I feel like the third overall pick doesn't have as much weight if you're trying to get a star. That's where I actually think, if we're talking about what Damian Lillard can get in conjunction with this idea of trying to play championship basketball, how much does the third overall pick mean in terms of being able to acquire a guy that is a floor raiser enough to put you into that conversation? You mentioned it beforehand with Jaylen Brown as an easy example. And honestly, you kind of sold me on the point, because I didn't even think to start going through the teams. But when you use Jaylen Brown, for example, as a good baseline, I think Karl Anthony Towns is like another like fantasy version that people keep coming up with. But I still think no matter what, when you look at the layout for it, these tandems that we put together, when you put them up against, especially this man, the Western Conference was low-key slept on. I know it was a dog show, like for like the latter half of it. Like it was tough to watch for a good portion of it. But that was a hard year regular season wise for Western Conference teams. And so when you look at teams like you mentioned beforehand, the Sacramento Kings on the rise, the Dallas Mavericks with a chance to retool, the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are kind of just getting better internally and moving up the ladder board, you do wonder, like, did this Portland team already cap out? And Marcus and TV, I'll even give you guys this as a question. TV, I actually asked you on this on the podcast a while back when we talked about Dame. So Marcus, maybe this is a little bit more of a question for you, because you mentioned it earlier about their past Western Conference Finals run. The thing that I always come back to when it comes to Dame and what's ahead of him is the idea of, when you've entered a postseason, can you name the last time you went into a playoffs and felt like the Portland Trailblazers were truly title contenders? I feel like I've always seen Portland punching above their weight, but I don't think
I would say
has truly ever built a contender around Dame.
Even when they made it to the Western Conference Finals, and I can pull that run up real quick. That even in and of itself was a shock to a lot of people when you consider all that went into that. Like when you look at, so let's see, in the first round they had I don't want to see all this stuff about the East. I don't really care. That's not the topic. When you look at who they had to go up against, Wikipedia is so thorough for no reason.
Yeah.
Super thorough for no reason. So their first round matchup was against the Thunder.
Mm-hmm.
A Thunder team that had Russ and PG, but Dame has always owned Russell Westbrook in the playoffs. Yeah. And the Thunder were as good as they were. The Thunder were not going to be a team that made it out of the first round. How do we know that? Because once KD left, they hadn't made it out of the first round. So that series, even though it was kind of like a back and forth kind of series, you look at that series, you say, okay, this is going to be a team that can make it to the second round when you look at the Portland Trail Blazers. You go on from that series to they went on to face the Nuggets. And I believe they won that series in 7 games. And that was a back and forth series that was really the beginning of the rise of Nikola Jokic, but Jamal Murray was there. Like Jamal Murray in 2019 was established as a legitimate playoff performer, not necessarily as one of the best, but he was up there and he was putting on great performances. And that was a duel between McCollum and Lillard and Jokic and Murray that could have gone either way. And then, like I said, you look at what happened in that Western Conference Final Series. Yeah, they got swept, but they were up in the fourth quarter in every single one of those games. And when you look at the team that they had to play up against, it's the Golden State Warriors, a team that had just won, 3 of the last 4 championships, right? After having only lost 1 game in the NBA Finals in the 2 seasons prior combined, right? Like that is who they were facing. The Portland Trail Blazers were never a team going into a season where you said, oh, this is a team that can win a championship. Now, what did happen was going into the 2020 season, we thought maybe there could be something here because of the run that they had. And we kind of all gave them the benefit of the doubt and said, man, it's because they ran into the buzzsaw that was the Golden State Warriors. And then, of course, Kevin Durant had left. And at the time, people were still trying to figure out what was happening with the Lakers because the Lakers were the 4th seed that first year that LeBron got there, but then he hurt his groin, and so he missed all that time around Christmas, and they went from being the 4th seed to like the 11th seed, and it was like, okay, whatever, right? The Thunder was still the Thunder, and I think by that time, Russ had actually got his way out of OKC into Houston, right? Paul George ends up in LA with Kawhi, right? CP3 trade. That's when all that stuff started to happen. And so there was a lot of uncertainty about what was happening around the course of the Western Conference. Is it the end of the Warriors? What's going to happen with the Clippers? Can PG and Kawhi stay healthy together, maybe win one? Can LeBron stay healthy in LA and win one there? Like there were a lot of questions. And so we thought, maybe the Portland Trail Blazers can come back from that and then win a championship. They made it into the playoffs. Of course, that was the bubble season. They made it into the playoffs. They run into the Lakers and they got sent home. And what was it, 5? Right. Yeah. So that was really all that was the only season I think we ever had any true expectations for what the Portland Trail Blazers can do. But even then, the expectations weren't that high because there were still all these moves made in the West as it pertains to parity. Because that was when we had gotten away from the big threes, and now we're just talking about dynamic duos. And as phenomenal of a backcourt as I thought that CJ McCollum, and I think we all thought that CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard were, they still weren't going to be able to compete with the Splash Brothers. And they still weren't going to be able to compete with the combination of Curry and Thompson. And we all ranted and raved about what the Westbrook Harden duo would look like. And of course, we had figured out what LeBron and AD looked like, and we thought that was a great tandem. Jamal Murray and Jokic, who even though they sent them home in 7, that was still a pretty good tandem. So they were left they were caught with their pants down, really, because they didn't do anything aggressive in that offseason to continue to build on that, which has been the story of the Portland Trail Blazers.
There you go. That's basically what that's what I was trying to say, because if you the reason why I asked you that question is because if you look at the build, whether it was his pairing with LaMarcus Aldridge, his time after CJ McCollum took the strides that he did, they never have truly built a true championship contender. And after the CJ McCollum trade, they are now out of arrows to fire. right? This third overall pick is quote unquote the saving grace. We are talking about this third overall pick in terms of trade packages, the way everybody was putting Russell Westbrook and 2 future first round picks together in the trade finder pretty much every week. That's pretty much what this third overall pick is amounted into. And don't get me wrong, we take a look back at that Russell Westbrook trade now, and you feel a lot better about what it all amounted to. Granted, they didn't even have to give up both picks that were always synonymous with the big splash trade that the Lakers were going to have to do in order to get the kind of depth they needed, right? But although that worked out to the extent that it did, they had the Lakers have 2 players that we still consider within the top 10, the top 15. This Portland team has 1 and a much younger, much more inexperienced roster beneath all of that in ways that this Lakers team did not. This Lakers team, when they fired their arrow, it was to acquire depth because the establishment of the lead guys was there. A handful of the role players were working themselves into the fray. Guys like Austin Reeves were stepping up in ways that we were not expecting entering this season. The Portland Trailblazers are trying to get who that other guy is, but it doesn't flesh out the rest of their roster, which means they're just the young couple of guys they'll kick. That's basically the Rockets last season, low key. Yeah. We keeping it a bean, not to be disrespectful, because of course the Rockets were much worse, but that's to say that from a roster construction standpoint, them getting another star guy doesn't change their trajectory that much, unless you're expecting crazy leaps from a bunch of the young dudes that are on your roster. And that's just tough to do when you're asking them to play playoff caliber basketball night in, night out, when they're still trying to develop into the players that Portland hopes that will become.
They haven't done anything, man. They're not going to continue to do anything. We're going to end up with Anthony Simons at the end of his contract being traded, and they're going to just replace him with Shaedon Sharpe. That's what's going to happen.
It very well could. It very well could. The last thing I'll say before we jump into the other things is the one thing I need them to stop doing is a half rebuild. I do not like half rebuilds. Either you're rebuilding or you're not, bro. Make up your mind. And I hate to throw this shot, but it's just the truth. I'm very interested to see what happens in Chicago, because Chicago keeps looking like they're trying to do some half rebuild nonsense, and I don't like half rebuilds. Either you are
bro. I know.
Like, either we're blowing it up or we're not. So that's what needs to happen. And one of 2 things are going to happen: either Chicago and Portland's going to be swapping stars, or they both need to just blow it up. And let's be honest. Even if you swap stars, they'll still be in the same place they are in right now, which is no man's land.
Newsflash, Marcus, we're not blowing it up. I saw news earlier that says we're having conversations about extending Vooch. We're salesmen, bro. I don't know, bro.
Tell that to my Raptors too, man. Just had my Raptors in that mix.
Brutal.
Before we get into NBA Finals, there's one last thing we have to talk about. That is that Nick Nurse, former head coach of your Toronto Raptors TV, is now the new head coach in Philly. TV, we'll start with you, since you've had an up-close personal view of Nick Nurse over these last couple of seasons. Can Nick Nurse turn it around in Philly?
I do think so, because he is a different type of coach to Doc Rivers, and it's the type of coach that the 76ers need if they do want to have a deep playoff run, because I've kind of put Doc Rivers and Mike Budenholzer in the same boat, and then we mentioned this in like a podcast that we recorded earlier, that they're both really good at like managing and handling 82 game seasons. That's why they're always near the top of their conference when it comes to record. That's why they're always winning like 50 plus games, because they know they have systems in place that are good for an 82 game season. When it comes to playoffs and you have to make changes on the fly in a maximum 7 game series, we've seen besides Mike Budenholzer's championship season, he hasn't been able to do that. And we're either eliminated in the conference finals or in the second round of the NBA playoffs. Doc Rivers, he can get them like forward into a series, but when it comes in, when he faces some sort of adversity, he tends to fold. That's why he has the most 3-1 leads blown in NBA history. He's had good teams in the past. I mean, just take away the Celtics team that won in 2008. He has not had good playoff success. He's had the Lob City Clippers. He's had this 76er team for a while now, and he hasn't got any results from it. What Nick Nurse does is that, yes, he's proven that he can do well in the regular season, but in the playoffs and where he makes his money is that when he sees a change, within a series that he can exploit, or if he sees like something that he can take advantage of, he will make that change. He's not going to stick to the same game plan that he did all season long. He is willing to take risks, and sometimes it's to his demise, as seen in the Toronto Raptors in the last 2 seasons. He's tried like so many different starting lineups and it hasn't really worked out. But at the end of the day, he's not afraid to take those risks, and that's just something that the 76ers need at this point. And if they want to make a deep playoff run with Joel Embiid, they're going to need someone like Nick Nurse, who is able to make those in-series adjustments, which Doc Rivers clearly has not been able to do so.
Jalon, do you think Nick Nurse heading to the Sixers is going to be the answer?
Man, that's a hefty question that has kind of some layers to it. But I think when you talk about addressing the biggest hole in the wall for them, I think that they did so. I think TV hit it on the head in terms of talking about what Doc Rivers brings to the table, but also what his limitations are. One of the biggest things that's always hurt Doc is he's a overachieving coach. He's one of those guys. I made this allusion. I alluded to this on the podcast that me and TV recorded earlier. He's one of those guys similar to James Harden that when the expectations are lowest, they overperform. I think a great representation of that is the beginning of the Boston Celtics series. We all thought game 1 was a sham, basically, in terms of Boston was going to come out, punch them in the mouth, no Joel Embiid for the Philadelphia 76ers. What does Harden go out and do? Drops 42, dogs it, right? Look back at the LA Clippers team that had the Lou Williams, Patrick Beverley, Tobias Harris squad. That was a team Doc Rivers backpacked, really. That was a year where the LA Clippers weren't supposed to be on nothing. And guess what? They gave the Golden State Warriors all they wanted in the first round of that postseason. Those are the kind of teams that Doc Rivers thrives with the most, because when the expectations are the lowest, all he has to do is punch above his weight. And he's a good enough head coach to be able to do that. The issue is when he gets into tactician battles, that's where all of that front running no longer works. It puts him in a bad position because he can no longer do the things that he did to get him to the dance. And he has a struggle with adjusting. Marcus, my bigger question, and I posed this to TV beforehand, and he had an interesting answer. My biggest question is why I think this is so multi-layered in terms of whether or not Nick Nurse is the answer is, do you think that Nick Nurse's hiring has any influence or any indication on whether or not the Philadelphia 76ers are going to be able to retain James Harden this offseason? Because Mike D'Antoni was one of the coaches in conversation for this job, and they made this hiring relatively quickly considering the circumstances. They had a plenty of time in the offseason, and granted, sure, teams like the Milwaukee Bucks and other teams are still sitting in the fray or were sitting in the fray for a potential shot at him. So, of course, you want to act swiftly if possible. But at the same time, there were a couple of other different candidates on the docket that maybe could sway things, Mike D'Antoni being one of them. Does that further indicate that James Harden could be on the move to Houston, or do you think that it has nothing to do with it? Because if you think it has nothing to do with it, then Nick Nurse could be huge. But if you think that has indicated what James Harden do, that changes the dynamic of this Philly team a good amount.
Whether Nick Nurse has anything to do with James Harden staying, I don't think matters. I don't think so, though, because I think I read somewhere earlier today that Nick Nurse actually had the option between the Suns and the Sixers. Like, he was informed that the Suns would like to move forward with him and the Sixers as well, and he chose Philadelphia. So whether or not that has anything to do with the James Harden future doesn't matter to me. Here's the deal. And I can't even believe I'm about to say this, because I have cut the Sixers so much slack over the last 2 years. Joel Embiid was drafted in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
It's 2023. We have been trusting this process for almost a decade, and the process ain't processing no more. We thought Brett Brown was the problem. They fired Brett Brown and hired Doc Rivers. Now, don't get me wrong. I like seeing black men have jobs. Makes my heart warm as a black man myself. Doc Rivers is not the answer. I don't know how Doc Rivers continues to fool these teams and rob them blind on the merits of a championship where he was coaching 3 Hall of Famers. 4. Really, if you want to be honest about it, 4 Hall of Famers. I don't really know how he's continued to do that, and we're 15 years removed from that championship. But shout out to him. He's one of the greatest con the world of basketball has ever seen. The Philadelphia 76ers have a personnel problem. They have a heart problem. They have a execution problem. That is not something that a coach can fix. A coach writes the X's and O's. He can't go on the court and play the game. True. What we saw from the Philadelphia 76ers and what we have seen from the Philadelphia 76ers since the 17-18 season is we have seen a team make the playoffs 6 consecutive seasons at one point with the number 1 seed in the conference. We have seen a Philadelphia 76ers team make it out of the second round 5 of those 6 seasons, and make it out of the first round 5 of those 6 seasons, and we've seen that team lose badly all 5 times. They got gentlemen swept in 2018. They lost in 7 on one of the craziest shots in the history of basketball in 2019. They got swept in round 1 of the following season by the Celtics. They lost in 7 to the Hawks when Ben Simmons forgot how to play basketball. They lost in 6 last season to Jimmy Buckets. They lost in 7 this season in a series they should have claimed at home in Game 6. I do not understand why we're doing this with the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, don't get me wrong. The last time you two lovely gentlemen on the show was a couple months ago. It was the last show of season 2. It was around the All-Star break, and we got into a very heated argument about who Joel Embiid is as a basketball player. Look, and don't get me wrong. I am still firmly in the belief that Joel Embiid is one of the best players of basketball. But when you are the MVP of the NBA, when you are the Kia, National Basketball Association's most valuable player, and you step into Game 7, and you get outscored by P.J. Tucker, of all people, you are getting outscored by P.J. Tucker. Anthony Leon P.J. Tucker Jr. is who got outscored by this season. And I'm supposed to sit here and believe that it's Doc Rivers' fault. Don't get me wrong. Doc Rivers has coached in the most Game 7s in the history of basketball. He's lost the most Game 7s in the history of basketball. He's given up the most 3-1 leads in the history of basketball. He's given up the most 2-game series leads in the history of basketball. This brother got to go, and he's gone. Great for Doc. And I don't just mean out of Philly. He needs to go to a retirement home somewhere.
Oh, that's brutal. That's brutal. That's brutal.
NBA TV. Go sign a contract with somebody's booth and sit back where you were before you became a coach on the sidelines doing reporting. That's what Doc Rivers need to be doing. These teams need to stop hiring Doc Rivers to be the head coach because he ain't the answer. He is not the answer. We've been trusting this process for 9 years, and it hasn't been working. And it's time to let it go. Nick Nurse is not the answer. Sorry, TV. He's not. Because here's the deal.
He's not.
Nick Nurse really didn't do that great of a coaching job when the Raptors won the championship in 2019. You know why the Raptors won the championship in 2019? Because Kawhi Leonard was there. Let's just call a spade a spade. Like that's really be 100% honest. How great of a coaching job did Nick Nurse do in 2019? Not that great. Because when Kawhi Leonard left, so did the Raptors. And we haven't heard from the Raptors since. We have had an APB out for the Raptors since 2019, and they ain't right back yet. Nick Nurse is not the answer. He's not. We're going to see this team once again get a favorable matchup in the first round, win in 4 or 5, make it to the second round, run into the Celtics, run into the Bucks, run into the Heat, and get sent home by the superior basketball team because that is who the Sixers are. And we need to get used to recognizing that that is who the Sixers are. Now, I know that sounds ironic coming from me considering that I'm the guy that said as long as James Harden plays elite basketball, the Sixers can win it all. Here's the deal. James Harden played elite basketball 2 games out of 7. That's not going to work. He dropped 40 twice. I don't think he scored a combined 40 points in the other 5 games that he played in the series. So it doesn't matter if he's in Philly, it doesn't matter if he's in Houston, it doesn't matter if he goes to some other basketball team that is in the home of a very African American populous city in America. He can go to Detroit, he can come to DC, he can go to Miami, he can go to Orlando. No matter where he goes, the black people ain't gonna follow, and neither are the championship wins. So the Sixers are done. They're cooked. All they're ever going to be is the ultimate bridesmaid. That's all they're ever going to be. And unfortunately, that's the reality of the situation. Nick Nurse is not a needle mover. He's not. He's just not. And
TV, me personally, I wouldn't let that slide. Me personally, I wouldn't let that slide.
TV knows Nick Nurse is.
He talked crazy on Toronto in the midst of that rant. That is crazy.
Let's manage.
Okay, no, the whole Toronto thing deserves a whole other argument. I'm not gonna get into here. We are celebrating Nikola Jokic being better than Joel Embiid. We are celebrating that today.
Smoking on that Joel pack today, sir.
Jokic been sent home in 5. Let's talk about Jokic. Matter of fact,
let's really get into it.
So let's talk about Jokic because I remember the two of you laughed at me when I said that if the Nuggets make it to the playoffs and make a deep playoff run, it would be because of Jamal Murray, because he's the better player. I remember getting laughed at for that. And I know that Jokic won Western Conference Finals MVP.
You're not about to do this. You're not about to cap
No,
on your own
please.
podcast. You're not. No, you're not.
No, we're not capping. We're calling it this. What? That's not what this says.
The 30-point triple-double is ridiculous. We're not about to do this.
I don't care what it was. He wasn't shooting 50, 40, 90. I don't care about no Sombor shuffle or whatever it's called. He didn't shoot 50, 40, 90.
40, 90.
That's what Jamal Murray did. He's the first player ever to average 30 points, shoot 50, 40, 90. What you want, the stats? What you want, the Bleacher Report graphic? Do you want the ESPN graphic? Do you want the Nuggets graphic? What graphic do you want?
So he cares about the 50, 40, 90, but not the oh my god.
Well, no, but what I'm saying is that
the triple-double graphic, he wants to tuck that in the trash. He wants to delete the Canva account for that one. That's crazy.
Oh, Nikola Jokic records triple-doubles. That's nothing new. But what I'm saying though is that the Nuggets don't make it past the Lakers without Jamal Murray. Like Jamal Murray backed this team in 2 games, if we want to call a spade a spade. But the team won it back. He did. He did. He did. I don't know why you're rubbing the bridge of your nose, Jalen. I know it's quite large.
Because Jamal sold 2 halves of basketball and had to resuscitate himself in the second half of 2 games in order to do what took place.
But he still backpacked the team. What was Jokic doing?
Who keeps that team afloat for
what
the
was
first half of
Jokic doing? What was Jokic doing when Jamal Murray went on a run by himself?
I'm not doing this, man.
What happened in game 1 when Anthony Davis dropped 40 and it didn't matter? What happened?
What happened? Jamal Murray scored 3 points in in one of the games.
That's not the point. The point is
that's not the point. Is crazy. Like what?
The point is,
oh my god!
So this is what we do, and this is why I hate talking about Nikola Jokic, because when Nikola Jokic has a bad game, or when Nikola Jokic doesn't perform optimally in a half, we don't talk about it. We only talk about Nikola Jokic when he's playing optimal basketball, when he's playing this crazy efficient basketball, flopping around there like a walrus or whatever animal you want to say, he's flopping around there, a discombobulated seal, whatever the case may be. Like, we only want to talk about Jokic when he's throwing passes and all this other crazy stuff and dropping triple doubles. We never want to hold Jokic accountable, like for the lackluster defense that he plays. If Anthony Davis, Anthony Davis is one of the better defensive players in basketball. Yes, yes.
Okay. He couldn't handle Jokic.
Right, he couldn't handle Jokic, but no one thinks saying, Jokic it's unacceptable that Jokic allowed AD to drop 40. That's
I agree. I agree with that 100%. I think that's totally fair if you want to play it that way, because I think
that is like holding Nikola Jokic accountable. And what I've heard from the two of you, G.O.A.T and TV, is that y'all don't like holding Jokic accountable.
Listen. No, I think I agree with you in the sense of holding Jokic accountable. I think that's one of the more notable things about going into this series against Bam Adebayo. I think if Bam is very physical with in terms of how Miami's play style is, that could be huge. Nikola Jokic on the boards and his physicality is going to be an X factor in this series, because I think that if Bam decides to be aggressive offensively, I'm not saying he's going to put up AD-like numbers, but I think that Nikola Jokic, if he's not forced to work on the defensive end, that only makes his life much easier, considering he's one of the best offensive players in basketball. What I want to go back to is the idea that you said we only talk about Nikola Jokic when he's throwing great passes, dropping triple-doubles, and playing efficient basketball. So that, I guess that means we talk about him every day, huh? Because I mean, considering circumstances, I don't see any circumstance where he plays below that belt.
No, we've seen Jokic drop duds. Stop it. Like, let's stop doing this thing here where Jokic is Jesus and he walks on water. You out here talking like Jokic is turning water into wine out here and feeding the 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Not what's
oh my God, man.
That's not what's happening. I watched Jokic lose to the Houston Rockets, who was the 14th seed in the West. And he had 14 points, 11 boards, like 12 turnovers.
We are talking about the postseason right now.
Said a word. If Nikola Jokic gets outplayed, we don't talk about it. We only want to talk about Nikola Jokic when Nikola Jokic is outplaying other people. And it's unacceptable. It is extremely unacceptable. And if Jokic gets outplayed in this series by Jimmy Butler, I want to hear you talk about it, TV. I want to hear you talk about it, Jalen. TV, when you get on TikTok after every game of the NBA Finals and you say, game when the NBA Finals, let's go, and you do that, and Jokic drops the dunk, I want to hear about Jalon Dixon. When you walking down the street to DC, going wherever it is you're going, and you got the TikTok, and when Jokic drop a dunk, what are you talking about? I don't want us to keep doing this thing where we're talking about what we're not supposed to be talking about. I need to hear us talk about it.
Here's the thing, though. Here's the
Bam Adebayo, who's one of the most inconsistent players in basketball on both sides of the ball.
Yeah,
Bam Adebayo get his rocks off one of these games. I need to hear the co-host of it.
Okay, and I think that's fair because we even addressed it on the podcast that I think that is one of the most notable things because you mentioned. I think that's a great point in itself. Bam Adebayo. In a series like this, if we, for those who are the Nikola Jokic pessimists, the ones who point out the lack of defensive fortitude that he has, things that should be noted, by the way. I don't think that Nikola Jokic is a dog water defender. I just don't think he is an elite rim defender the way that everybody else pictures the center position to be. That's the big difference. With that being the case, come on now, let's not do this. Because you talking about all these, come on, Bleacher Report graphics and all this stuff. You don't make me start pulling up stats. I don't even do that.
I don't want to hear anything about defensive box plus minus. And
no one's doing that
stuff, bro. Like, stop pulling you this.
Oh my goodness. This is what doesn't make sense to me. This is what doesn't make sense to me.
Ever impacted a game defensively? When?
Never. But no one's asking him to do that.
No
one's asking him to do that.
When you talk about Nikola Jokic not playing well in the conference finals, where was AD taking advantage, huh? Where was AD taking advantage of Jokic not having a great game? He should have been the one taking advantage of that matchup. Where was he doing?
We're not talking about AD. We're talking about Nikola Jokic.
But see, that's what we're saying. Anytime that we talk about a different center who had to take that matchup. When they get cooked, we're not talking about that.
Did AD fail to take advantage because AD was inconsistent, or did AD fail to take advantage because Jokic locked him up? Because it wasn't the latter. We can.
Attacking him. Why wasn't he attacking him then?
Listen, AD's inability to
inconsistent against the bad defender. That's what we're talking. That's how we're saying.
No, but this is what I'm saying. You're acting like AD. First of all, you're acting like AD had bad games because Jokic was playing great ball defensively. AD had bad games because AD had ups and downs through the course of the playoffs. It's not like Jokic just grew a pair and locked them up one day. That's not what happened.
But listen, but this is my question. No one's saying that no one say he locked him up. But if he's so bad of a defender, how are you inconsistent? Sound like barbecue chicken to me.
AD's always been inconsistent. Jalon, what are you talking about?
But if Nikola Jokic is as bad of a defender as we're saying, then it should be easy work.
Should be.
As good as Anthony Davis played in game one, no one's saying he had to average 40 for the series. But if you know that Nikola Jokic is quote unquote a mismatch defensively in terms of what you have, and you have a top 10 center or a top 10, top 15 player in Anthony Davis, inconsistent or not, if he is the open matchup, then you play through star, correct?
I don't disagree with you.
The lack of consistency is due to the fact that Anthony Davis didn't exploit the matchup of the weak link we're talking about?
That's exactly what happened. Yes. What are you talking about?
Whose fault is that?
It's AD's fault. What do you mean? I'm confused. I'm trying to figure out the point that you're trying to make.
The point that I'm making is you're making this whole big thing about Nikola Jokic not being a big time defender, but it doesn't seem like anybody's trying to exploit that.
The Lakers shot way too many threes in that series. Way too many threes. When the so-called weakest link was down low, you could have attacked them every single possession.
Wait a second. Time out. Once again, I don't disagree. The Lakers would be playing on Thursday if they did these things. Darvin Ham's not a good coach. I don't disagree with you here. He spends more time with his hands in his pocket than he does drawing plays. We're not disagreeing here. What I'm saying is Nikola Jokic is not a good defensive basketball player, is what I'm saying. And because he's not a good defensive basketball player, we need to start talking about that more. And we don't, because we get wowed by the fact that he drops 30-point triple doubles. And we marveled at the fact that Jokic dropped 50 points or whatever it was against AD in game one, but it failed to mention the fact that AD had 40 in his own right. And what I'm saying to you is if that happens in this series, if Bam Adebayo gets his stuff off in this series in a way that he never has before, we need to look at Jokic under a microscope in a way that we never have before. Jalen, you can unfurl your brows, bro, and get your elbow off the corner of the chair like that.
I'm just listening to you. I'm just hearing you out.
The issue is what all the hostility is here. You know how I feel about Nikola Jokic. This is no disrespect. I just look at him.
I'm just trying to figure out, because your two-way MVP had less than PJ Tucker. You just went on that rant beforehand. So the two-way guy that's your MVP now,
right,
does not show up in a big time game such as that one,
and he deserves to be held accountable for it.
So
because he lost.
But you're worried about projecting about what Nikola Jokic might not do, not what has already happened.
Jokic keeps on winning.
You're saying if Bam Adebayo gets his off, but if Bam is 15-10, like he's basically 15-8, like he's been operating,
that's who Bam is.
That's not Jokic's fault.
So if he operates within that, then are we pointing the finger at Nikola Jokic that he's who he normally is?
I think you're grasping for straws now because you're so emotionally invested in Nikola Jokic. This is what happened back in February. Let's back it up.
Yeah, back in February, we told you your MVP was whack, and we found out because one guy's still here and the other one booked his Cancun flight 2 weeks ago.
Wait a second. Hold on. Bring it back just a bit.
Oh my God, this guy kills me.
This is what I'm saying to you.
Okay.
If Bam Adebayo goes 15-8, whatever. Bam Adebayo is 15-8. That's who he is.
Okay.
What I'm saying to you is, if Bam Adebayo goes more than 15-8, we're talking about a 20-10, a 25-12 Bam Adebayo in this series, then yeah, we need to look at Nikola Jokic. Because
and we will. We will.
Will you?
We will.
No.
I will, because it's still he's gonna average 20 and 10 in this game. This series is still gonna end in 6 games.
Time out. Let's stop this. We're not even talking about we the masses. I'm talking about Jalon Dixon and TV on basketball.
Yeah. Bro. We're gonna talk about how Bam Adebayo averaged 20 and 10 and the Nuggets still won in 6 games. Yeah, that's what's gonna happen.
And you don't believe that. Number one.
Why would I lie? It's the GO.A.T Talk with Marcus podcast. I have no reason to lie here.
You've told several lies on this show, and if I need to pull the tape, I will.
You told me the MVP was Embiid, and I think the only reason you read that one out was because you watch ESPN more than I do. Because other than that,
ESPN at all. I don't know
because I don't know. My MVP's still playing. I don't know.
Well, it's a regular season award. So that's
buddy, see, it's
wait. But your MVP. Wait. What was your MVP doing this time last year and the year before that? He was in Serbia on a horse, right?
Okay. Your MVP was in the same galloping spot. You just went down the 76ers whole resume.
But now you're trying to make it seem like my MVP is less than your MVP when your MVP won 2 of them things back to back and still got sent home in the second round last season. So
where's Jamal Murray?
The second round?
Now it's where was Jamal Murray? 3 months ago when I brought up Jamal Murray. 3 months ago when I brought up Jamal Murray, both of you sat here on this show on the season finale of this show, All-Star break, sat here and laughed me in my face when I brought up the importance of Jamal Murray on this basketball team because how great and how grand one Nikola Jokic is.
Because you mentioned him in the light of needing to be the best player on the team in order to floor raise this team, and that's not what this is. Was
Jamal Murray not the best player on the team in 2020 in the bubble? Was he not?
No.
He was.
You're absurd.
Okay. There's an argument. There's an argument he was, but that's 2020. That was 2020.
Far away the best player on the team in the bubble when they were in the Western Conference Finals. And all I said was in the 2 years that he was gone, Nikola Jokic had to do more, and so he developed into the player that he is today. Bro, unfurrow the brow. I don't understand what the confusion is about. Unfurrow the brow.
He's killing me with this. You're killing me with this.
Yeah, Jamal Murray's still playing great, but you know who's still playing better? Jokic.
Jokic played a better series than Jamal Murray.
Yes.
Fine. Whatever. What I'm saying to you is the Jokic that we see today only exists because of the injury that Jamal Murray suffered. This Nikola Jokic doesn't exist if Jamal Murray doesn't miss 2 years. You know that, and I know that. That's a fact. Jokic wasn't doing what he's doing now when Jamal Murray was healthy and playing basketball. He wasn't.
Tell me what that means, though. What does that mean, though?
Was Nikola Jokic an MVP caliber basketball player in 2019 and 2020?
He's a completely different player now. He's completely different.
Answer the question. In 2019 and 2020, when Jamal Murray was healthy and performing in the playoffs, was Nikola Jokic an MVP caliber basketball player? Yes or no? No. When did Nikola Jokic turn into an MVP caliber basketball player? In the 2 seasons that Jamal Murray didn't play basketball because he didn't have a ligament in his knee, is what I'm saying to you. So yes, Nikola Jokic is a completely different basketball player, but he's a completely different basketball player because he was the second best player on the team and had to fill the gap because the number one option wasn't available. So he had to step up and he developed into what he's become now. And so now, because the offense works differently and because it flows differently and because of what Jamal Murray brings to the table, Jamal Murray was able to come back and be the same guy that he was before. But now he's the second option instead of the first option because of who Nikola Jokic has become, is what I'm saying. All I'm saying is if Jamal Murray doesn't get hurt, Jokic isn't who he is today. Jokic isn't in the conversation as the best player in the league. Jokic isn't looked at as one of the premier guys in basketball. Would he still be a top 10, top 15 player? Absolutely, because he has the talent. But Jamal Murray doesn't get hurt. We're not talking about Jokic the way we're talking about it. Jalen Dixon's blood pressure isn't raised every time I say something constructive about the way.
I just think that's tough projecting. I think that's tough projecting. But I understand what you're saying, though. There's a developmental curve to not having a lead guard. I do understand.
When you look at the trajectory, here's another great example. Now they're on completely different levels, obviously. When you look at what Jordan Poole did last season, right? Okay. Jordan Poole turned into who he became and was able to continue that into the postseason because Klay Thompson wasn't there. He got more minutes. He played more starting minutes. He played along Steph more. He learned how to play off of Steph so that even when Klay came back, he was still in that rhythm. So come postseason time, he was able to do that. Look at what Jordan Poole did this year. He sucked. You know why Jordan Poole sucked? Because he didn't get all the exposure that he got last season. The difference between Poole and Jokic is Jokic still has all that exposure. He hasn't lost his spot because Jamal Murray's come back. And because of how the offense has floated, because of how the team has developed, Jamal Murray is still able to be the guy that he is without hindering Nikola Jokic's game, and vice versa. Jokic is still able to be the guy that he became without hindering Jamal Murray's performance. So what I'm saying is, as much and as fantastic as Nikola Jokic is offensively, and as much as he is the liability defensively, that doesn't take away from the greatness that is Jamal Murray in this postseason. What Jamal Murray did this season, specifically in the Western Conference Finals, is something we've never seen before. And we don't talk about it because we give all the credit to Jokic. And all I'm saying is, if you look at who Jamal Murray is, who Jamal Murray was, and how he came back from missing essentially 2.5 years of basketball, coming back off that ACL and basically being right back at where he was. We talked about KD when he came back in Brooklyn after the Achilles, and he was doing something we never seen someone do in the NBA, at least, coming off an Achilles. What Jamal Murray has done since coming off his ACL is on that level. He hasn't missed a beat, and he doesn't get credit for it because of who Jokic has become.
I think I agree with that.
We have to look at that, and we have to take into consideration that Jamal Murray is playing great basketball.
Yeah,
I'm not discounting the fact that he dropped duds in some halves. Yeah. But when they needed him to be who he was in the bubble, he stepped up and he did that in that game. In what was that game? In that game too, when he went on a run basically by himself and hit like 2 and had 11 straight points and carried the team in the fourth quarter. He did that. He set the tone in game 3. He set the tone in game 4, taking nothing away from what Jokic is offensively. Of course, jokes are jokes. Of course, the 30-point triple-double means a lot. You drop a 30-point triple-double, that means a lot. That's a hard thing to do, especially at the center position, even if you are one of the greatest passers, if not the greatest passers at the position. But Jamal Murray, what he did can't go unnoticed. It can't go unacknowledged.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you with that. If we're strictly having a conversation about the idea of is Jokic backpacking this team, then I think we all are on the same page that is not the case. I will thoroughly agree with that. I think the reason why, outside of the fact that Jokic is like the runner-up of the MVP, and all that great stuff like that, I think one of the main reasons why Jokic is so at the forefront of these conversations, TV and me have had this conversation a few times about Jokic so far this season, is that it's not just his individual production that has allowed this Nuggets team to be this good. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is having an elite 3-point shooting season, the greatest 3-point season of his career so far. That's on the back of Nikola Jokic. Aaron Gordon has improved as an overall basketball player, both on and off the ball. That has been a part of playing with Nikola Jokic. I'm not telling you what I'm saying. I'm telling you not even just what the tape is saying. I'm telling you what's coming out of these players' mouths in terms of what's taking place. When you look at the acquisition of Bruce Brown, the empowerment of Bruce Brown as an on-ball player is so much different than what he was allowed to be offensively when he played with the Brooklyn Nets. That's because of the faith as a passer and as a shot creator for his teammates that Nikola Jokic is. I think Jamal Murray's quote-unquote claim to fame when you mentioned that 2020 run is that when you need an individual performance, Jamal Murray is more than capable of giving you a game or multiple games of a level that can amount to winning a series. I think the difference is that Nikola Jokic has proven, even in that absence of Jamal Murray, again, I understand the development that you're mentioning, but I think the most important and most notable thing about that is within that development, this wasn't a learning curve that came with roadblocks. I mean, obviously postseason wise, there was a limitation of talent, and that's where guys like Jamal Murray raised that level. But in terms of regular season production, Nikola Jokic was able to develop at this pace that you're saying of going from what is not an easy jump of being a top 20, borderline, maybe top 15 player to MVP status. That's not a casual jump. This is not a player being a solid player for a while and then becoming an all-star for the first time. No, this is a different echelon of jump. So for him to be able to do that and lead his team to the playoffs in those absences that you're referring to, I think those are all of the things that amount to this narrative around Jokic. I don't think that Jamal Murray is the quote unquote cherry on top when it comes to this Denver Nuggets team, but he's somewhere in that realm. And that's probably more of the reason why. But I think one of the points that I don't want to get lost is your point about being able to actively criticize Nikola Jokic. I think that's a point that I should be hitting more. Honestly, this is me being objective also as well. I do believe that when you look at what Jokic does, he's in a position where I feel as though he is both overhyped and underrated depending on what crowd you're speaking to. That's one of the things that because me and TV had this conversation, and Marcus, I'll phrase it to you this way. The Denver Nuggets, now that they are represented in the Western Conference, the question that I asked myself was, when you look at their production in the regular season, you see the improvement of their role players, you see the MVP caliber play of Nikola Jokic, along with the return of not only Jamal Murray, but also Michael Porter Jr. to the lineup and what they've been able to bring. They had an excellent regular season in a Western Conference that was dog water, by the way, especially towards the middle, and they made a significant run all the way to what now is the NBA Finals. We have to ask ourselves whether or not the Denver Nuggets were this championship caliber of a team this entire time, and no one wanted to recognize it. Because let's go down the bullet points of all the teams that we put before Nikola Jokic and the Denver Nuggets. We thought the Lakers were going to take them out. We thought the Phoenix Suns with Devin Booker and Kevin Durant were going to be a part of this. We thought that the Golden State Warriors were going to run it back and make a significant run. We put a bunch of other teams that had significant question marks over this Denver Nuggets team that proved to us throughout the entirety of a regular season, and now is even amounted to this point that they probably were the best team out of the West this entire time. But we kept giving ourselves reason after reason after reason to pick against the Denver Nuggets. So I think it depends on what crowd you come from, because for those who you believe, like you believe me and TV are one of these optimists for Nikola Jokic that thinks he can do no wrong, there's also the crowd of people that completely doubt that he even has the ability to be this caliber of a guy in the first place. So I think it really depends on what crowd you're speaking to, because I think in one realm, we might overhype Jokic, and I'm willing to concede to that. But I think there's another group of individuals who don't even believe that Jokic is really good enough to be this caliber of player to lead a team to a championship. And here we are. We're sitting in this opportunity. We're sitting here with this opportunity now where the Denver Nuggets can walk out of here with the Larry O'Brien. And even to this point, I think there's still people who still doubt that in a series against the Miami Heat, where Nikola Jokic and the Denver Nuggets are probably the better team, that people are probably picking the Miami Heat for reasons that involve doubting what Jokic is capable of, along with the rest of his team.
What the Denver Nuggets have showed us. The Denver Nuggets have shown us over the past couple seasons, before this one, a level of inconsistency, an inability to execute, and an inability to close out. When you look at some of those players, specifically Michael Porter Jr., that is where that comes from. I don't disagree with you. There is definitely a group of people out there that underrate Nikola Jokic. I don't underrate Nikola Jokic. I look at the full picture. And the full picture is, as great as Nikola Jokic is offensively, he's not that great defensively. And we hold certain players to that standard. We hold certain players to the standard of having to be able to bring it on both sides of the ball on a night in, night out basis. We hold a 38-year-old LeBron James in a closeout game where he played every single minute and dropped nearly a 40-point triple-double to that standard. We hold a guy in Kevin Durant who a lot of people will say his career is nothing without Golden State. We hold him to that standard. We hold a guy in Giannis Antetokounmpo who is, I would say, at the top of the mountain. But a lot of people would say it's at the top of the mountain in the NBA now. Maybe not after Jokic wins the championship. But we hold him to that standard. We hold a 25-year-old Jason Tatum to that standard, and he's only 25 years old. We hold Steph Curry to that standard, and Steph Curry's never really been a guy that brings it on the other side of the ball. We hold young guys to the standard. We hold Luka to that standard. We hold Ja to that standard. There was a point when it looked like Trae Young was on the up and up, and we were holding him to that standard. We hold Kawhi Leonard to the standard. We hold Paul George to the standard. We held James Harden and Russell Westbrook to that standard at some point. We look at AD and we criticize AD a lot because of his inability to stay healthy, except for the fact that whether you want to admit it or not, he's played more games since he's been in LA than Paul George and Kawhi Leonard has, and no one bats an eye. We hold Jordan Embiid to this standard. We hold all these players to that standard. We hold Kyrie Irving to this standard. And the one guy we don't hold to this standard is Nikola Jokic. We do not hold Nikola Jokic to the standard of superstardom. We have never held Jokic.
But don't you think that's because people still don't expect it from him? I still think that part of that is because people still do not believe that the way he looks, the way he plays, and the dominance in which it asserts itself is all things that do not seem realistic for what this NBA has always been built off of.
But whether we expect it or not, this is the reality of the situation. Whether you love him or you don't, he's a two-time reigning. He's a two-time back-to-back MVP. He's one of the best players in basketball. If you're one of the best players in basketball, you have to be held to the standard of being.
I agree with you, but I think people need to take that into consideration. I feel as though that's the reality that needs to be faced for us to then move into having the conversation of holding them standard. If once upon a time, Nick Wright went on TV and said that when Nikola Jokic won his first MVP, he would be the worst MVP ever in NBA history in terms of winning the award. This is the reality. This is the reality we're looking at. We are looking at a guy in Nikola Jokic that because he does not look, walk, talk like the MVP that we are used to, he is not viewed in such a way, and therefore the standards are also slanted against those type of things in terms of holding him accountable. And I think it's associated with the fact that people still have not come to grips with the fact that he has done this. I think a similar thing is in relation to other players like Steve Nash, for example. I think it's completely forgotten that man won 2 MVPs. Why? Because the two times he won it, people say Kobe could have won it. Shaquille O'Neal has a very good case for the both years that Steve Nash won it, and therefore no one will call Steve Nash's MVP fraudulent, but it is not necessarily one of those things that really carries for his career because people still question the validity of it. The same thing goes for Nikola Jokic, and therefore I think it sways how we talk about him. The first thing that has to happen in order for us to start holding guys accountable is to first recognize who the heck they are. If he is the two-time MVP that could be walking into a championship at the end of this season, that is how he should be viewed in order for us to then hold a certain standard in relation to that. I agree with you, but I think that the narrative first has to start with acknowledging that he is that caliber of player, because all season long up until this point, people still believed in the idea of fraudulence. What is there now? Besides, the reality is this play now has led to this point. He's got his guy. It was amounting up to this point over the last 2 years, as you mentioned, in terms of his developmental process. Now he got his guys back on the floor, and now they have amounted to this feat that they are at now, where they are representing the Western Conference in the championship. I think, like I said, I think I agree with you. If I'm understanding you correctly, I agree with you wholeheartedly. But the conversation only can make that transition if we first recognize who he is. National media is very quick to crown people as superstar caliber players, MVP caliber players. This is the only guy that we've taken a long time to really manage the idea, really fathom the idea that, you know what, he really is a top 5 caliber player in this league. He really is a top 2 caliber player in this league. He really is a guy that could go down as an all-time great at the center position. This is something that now that he's in the finals, the wheels are just now turning. So now the conversation can start. But beforehand, I don't think that was on the table because I don't think people were giving it a chance.
And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I think there's a lot of people out there that believe that if Jamal Murray doesn't get injured and miss those 2 seasons, that we're not looking at Nikola Jokic. And I think that's what it stems from. Let's talk about the Heat for just a second before we jump into our NBA Finals predictions. This is a basketball team that for the first time ever, we've seen a play-in team make it to the Finals. This is the second ever 8th seed to make it into the Finals. And being honest, considering when you add the play-in, obviously I would say that this road to the finals as this 8th seed is different than the Knicks team way back when. TV, I'll start with you. When you look at the Miami Heat, who is the player that has to step up to ensure that at the very least they can not just maybe win it all, but at the very least have a legitimate shot at winning it all?
Bam Adebayo. He needs to be able to at least like make Jokic work, like at least work on the defensive end, at least in trying to expose like that he is not a great defender. He has to at least be aggressive on that end, and he also has to like make sure that Jokic feels him on the other end as well. Bam Adebayo averaged 14 and 9 in the Eastern Conference Finals, and he was able to get away with that because Caleb Martin averaged 19. Gabe Vincent had some good games. Duncan Robinson, Kyle Lowry like made up for the lack of scoring and lack of impact that Bam had. The last 2 games, he averaged like 30-something% from the field, and they were still able to pull out the series. Bam needs to be able to be all NBA Bam. He needs to be all defensive Bam, like top 2, top 3 defensive player of the year candidate version of Bam, in order for the Heat to even have a chance in this series. Nikola Jokic is going to get his, but the thing is, Bam has to do what he can in terms of in an impactful way that he can at least sort of match the impact even of Jamal Murray, because I feel like Jimmy Butler and Jokic at some point are going to cancel each other out in the finals. The second option matchup between Murray and Bam, at this point, it looks like it's a wash to Murray. Bam needs to close in that gap quite a bit in order for the Miami Heat to have a chance. They've been really heavily relying on the role players so far, and I don't know how far that's going to take you in this series against the Denver Nuggets. So what's one way to kind of mitigate the possible struggles that the role players might have? You need your second star to step up, and Bam Adebayo has to be that guy.
TV, do you agree? Is it Bam?
I mean, Jay?
Yeah, Jay, my bad. Do you agree? Is it Bam?
Oh, yeah. I mean, me and TV are lockstep on this one. I think at the end of the day, if we're going to talk about Nikola Jokic and his defensive problems, then for a team, I preached all throughout the postseason when talking about the Eastern Conference. Physicality was the definition of what this Eastern Conference was going to look like throughout the entirety of that of the run. And the Miami Heat have been the most physical team coming out of the Eastern Conference, and it's amounted to this. From the very beginning, I viewed the Eastern Conference as whoever would play the most physical, the most playoff basketball prepared. That was going to be the team that stepped out, because from a talent standpoint, it was kind of all across the board in terms of who really stood out. Because if there's 2 stars here, there's a limitation at coach. If there's one big star, they have a significant bench. It depended on what flavor of team you were looking at in terms of what you felt like would move forward. But one thing that would translate from series to series was the physicality. We saw that with the Miami Heat, from whether it be the Milwaukee Bucks series or even most recently. I think when you talk about physicality, the reason why Game 7 happened the way it did wasn't just because Jason Tatum went down. It's because despite the fact that the Boston Celtics are a younger team, the Miami Heat, I make this joke with TV all the time, the Miami Heat literally need you to have a certain body mass index in order to even be on the floor. That's literally the requirements they have in order for you to even play on this basketball team. So in terms of being prepared for a Game 7 with the kind of high emotions and physicality of guys playing 40 plus minutes in Game 6 that ended the way it did, to come out and punch them in the mouth like that shows fortitude. That's what this comes down to. But Bam Adebayo in a series like this, where if we're talking about matchups, he has a significant advantage in terms of what he's able to do offensively. If we're talking about Nikola Jokic being as bad defensively as we all view, which again, I'm not saying Nikola Jokic is some all NBA caliber defender either, but if he's as bad as many go out to put him as, and the tape does tell it as well. So again, I'm not trying to, wash over that either. If Nikola Jokic is as bad defensively as we all understand, Bam Adebayo as an all NBA caliber guy should take this as an opportunity to exploit that circumstance. Jimmy Butler has done what he's done throughout this entire postseason. It cannot be washed over. Like TV said beforehand, if we're talking Jimmy versus Nikola Jokic in terms of 1-to-1, they're probably playing dead even right now. I think even if you had to say who's the MVP of the postseason right now, it's probably a hard toss-up, despite the fact that, of course, Jokic has been sitting around for 9 days because they handled business. But I would also say that Jimmy Butler's heroic efforts have its own narrative attached to it. So that's a debate in itself. But once you get to that second guy, there is no argument that Jamal Murray is easily the third best player in this series. And from that point on, it gets sticky. It does, because it depends on how much you believe in the Bam Adebayo. I don't think that I don't think Kyle Lowry is playing better than Michael Porter Jr. right now. I think you can make an argument maybe for Caleb Martin right now, but I think Caleb Martin and Michael Porter Jr. from a production standpoint meet right at the middle, and it goes down and down and down. And when you look throughout it, I'm sorry, the weak link, if we're going 1-to-1, is Bam if he doesn't play up to what we know he's capable of. I hate to put so much on Bam because we know how good he truly is, but TV said it best. If Bam is Bam is not going to get away with 30% shooting games in this series. It won't happen. Denver has been shooting the ball way too well. Nikola Jokic has been playing way too well, both on the boards and offensively, whether it be on the inside or from beyond the arc. And on top of that, I'm sorry, but the depth of Denver has been playing too well to the point that there cannot be any lollygagging by Miami. And I don't think Miami is the kind of team to do so. But again, Bam can't be the guy that you got to hide. He can't.
All right, we're like 30 minutes over, so you've got to get out of here real quick.
Hey, bro.
And then Jalon, give me your NBA Finals predictions.
Yeah. I'll start with it. Give me Nuggets in 7. I went through on our podcast how I see this series playing out. But all I will say here is that I think the narrative is going to switch a lot in this series. I think we're going to see a lot of talk about how Miami's aggression is getting to the Denver Nuggets' head. I think we're going to see a lot of the Denver Nuggets are just too skillful. They're just too talented for Miami to deal with. But at the end of the day, I think when it comes to a Game 7 down in Denver with the high altitude stuff, due to the high altitude and all that, the home court advantage, I still think the Denver Nuggets are going to pull it out. So give me the Nuggets in 7.
Great, Joe.
Look, man, Cinderella not getting her slippers this year. It's tough. It's quiet out here, bro. I got Denver in 6. I think this is going to be a very aggressive series. I mentioned this to TV on our podcast. I think there's 2 important games more than anything in this series. Game 1 is very important because Miami is coming off the high of winning a Game 7 while Nikola Jokic and the Denver Nuggets have been sitting for 9 days. And I say that specifically out of the fact that how they come out of the gate is going to be very important, because if they come out sluggish against Miami, coming off of what they've done, Miami could make this a series very early with Game 1. I also think that Game 3 is super important because Miami needs to be able to take their version of home court advantage very early. They need to be able to protect their house because Denver is undefeated at home. I'm not saying that means that Denver's going up 2-0 off the gate, but Denver is undefeated at home. And until somebody takes them out at home, that means they're positioned very well because they have home court advantage in this series. But Game 3 is going to be very definitive because if for any reason the Denver Nuggets do hop out to a 2-0 lead, the Miami Heat, this is not Boston. They cannot afford to go down 2-0, 3-0 in this series and expect to come out on top. If they don't win game 1 and Game 3, I think are the most important games of this entire series. If it's meant to go the distance, I'm sorry, bro. The Denver Nuggets have the best player in the series. They might have the second best player in the series. They have the third best player in the series. Jimmy Butler is obviously the second best player in the series. They have 2 of the top 3 best players in the series. I think their depth has been playing much better than Miami's, despite the fact that Miami cannot be slept on for what their bench has done. But I'm giving it 6 games out of the fact that I think that Miami's going to make it significantly competitive, regardless of how the Boston series made it look.
Miami Heat are gonna win this series in 7. I just can't, bro. I can't. I can't. And it's no shot at the Nuggets. I think the Nuggets are a fantastic basketball team, but this is the series when Jimmy Butler makes his mark on basketball. And I don't just mean this season. I don't just mean this series. I think Jimmy Butler solidifies himself as one of the greatest playoff performers the game of basketball has ever seen, with a win in this series, in Game 7, in Denver. And I'll be honest with you, Jalon, I 100% agree with you. Game 1 is super important because we always kind of play this game of what's more important, which team benefits more, the team that's rested a while before a series or the team that's in their rhythm and coming off that high. Game 3 is also super important. Here's the deal, though, and here's what's super, super, super important. And I think it's something to look at. The Miami Heat this season, if I'm not mistaken, have a very good record on the road. Like
That's
I understand that the Nuggets are undefeated, but if there's one team that can go into Denver and win a game on the road, it's the Miami Heat.
Yes.
And I'll be honest with you, I'm inclined to think that the Heat will lose Game 1, but if the Heat win Game 2, they're also going to win Game 3. And if they win Game 3, I'm not saying they're going to win Game 4, but 2 in a row for the Heat has always seemed to be the thing that kind of gets them in that rhythm. Caleb Martin has been playing a phenomenal series. And obviously Jimmy Butler has, or a postseason, excuse me, and obviously Jimmy Butler has with a couple of duds here and there, but he's still been playing really, really, really good basketball. I think Jimmy Butler solidifies himself. Forget being a top 10 player in basketball because in the regular season, he's not that. And he doesn't care about that. He cares about checks. He cares about championships. Jimmy Butler with a championship this season solidifies himself as one of the greatest player performers the game of basketball has ever seen. And I think that's what he's going for. I don't think we give Eric Spoelstra enough credit for how well of a coach he is. I think that we have kind of forgotten how good of a coach he is. And I think we put a lot of stock in the fact that he won his he won his 2 championships with LeBron and D Wade as the guys at the helm, more so LeBron than D Wade. And I think we forget just who Eric Spoelstra is and just how talented of a head coach that he is. I think Eric Spoelstra solidifies himself as one of, if not the best head coach in basketball. I think Jimmy Butler solidifies himself as one of the greatest player performers the game has ever seen. And I think the Miami Heat remind us all that it doesn't matter who's on the roster or who's stepping foot on the floor. They are one of the most storied franchises in basketball. There are not many teams in the franchises in the history of basketball to have at least 4 championships. I think the Miami Heat are going to join that list this season, and we're going to start looking at Miami a lot differently as it pertains to where they rank as a franchise among some of the other great franchises in the history of basketball. They're well far off from the Celtics and the Lakers. They're in a tier of their own, obviously each having 17 banners apiece. But when you start talking about franchises like the Spurs, you start talking about franchises like the Warriors, when you start talking about some of those franchises that are established and have that storied history, we're going to look at the Miami Heat. I know they have 3 rings right now, but it's been a minute. We're going to look at the Miami Heat, and we're going to start putting some more respect on their name, not just as a basketball team in today's era of basketball, but as a franchise in the story of basketball. I think the Heat are going to become one of those teams where you can't tell the story of basketball without the Miami Heat. I think that's what they're slowly approaching. I think they win this series. Fellas,
the Script Brothers wouldn't have it any other way.
They wouldn't have it any other way. It's always a pleasure to have you guys on the show. We need to start our shows early, especially if we're going to be going 38 because it's almost 10:30. Real quick before we get out of here, fellas, please let everybody know where they can find you guys and all y'all's content.
Well, I mean, you can follow, of course, our individual pages and Knockdown J at TV on basketball. But what we're really focusing on right now is the Hit Your Free Throws podcast, TikTok, Instagram. You can find all the great daily content over there. If you want to watch it on YouTube, like, share, and subscribe, Hit Your Free Throws on YouTube. And then you can find our podcast on Apple or Spotify. Leave a review, all that good stuff. Marcus, thank you again for having us on your show.
Yes, sir.
It's always a pleasure, man. Please be sure, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Give Us a Shot Network. There's a lot of amazing content on the network, not just myself, but also Bert and Jeremy stuff about sports. JT and Don with the JT and Don All Sports Podcast. You got the High Spot Podcast as well. You have Mike and Corey with the Divide Live, which would be live this Friday. Go Talk and Marcus will be back this Friday with my guy Martin Soares. We're going to talk some women's basketball. The WNBA is back, and the first couple of games have been amazing. Open weekend was spectacular. We had some games on tonight. There's going to be games on throughout the course of the week. As I said in the first women's basketball episode a couple weeks ago, once the NBA is done, everything that's going to be on this show is going to be all things women's basketball, with the exception of the occasional WWE pay-per-view here and there. So if you don't like that, subscribe to the network and watch something else. If you do like that and you're a real basketball fan and you like watching women's basketball, you know where to find me right here on YouTube. That's what we're going to be talking about. If you're not a real, like, if you don't like women's basketball, like, you're not a real human being. Like, you're a garbage human being, and you deserve all the bad things that happen to you. So, Jalon Dixon of the Hit Your Free Throws podcast. This is Marcus Go Talk of Marcus signing off. Thank you guys for watching. Enjoy yourself some women's basketball. Hope you guys enjoy game 1 of the NBA Finals. Tips off this Thursday in Denver. And as always, you guys enjoy the rest of your lives.